Okay, so this is our fourth edition of the Isopanishad class. We're covering mantras 12 through 14, and you'll notice that these first these verses we're covering today, 12 through 14, closely resemble the format that we had in 9 through 11. They talk in a very similar way. They're just kind of focusing in more closely and give you a more focused understanding. So mantra 12 is here. It's andam tama pravishanti ye sambhutim upasate tatobuya ivate tamo ya usambhutyam rataha. Those who are engaged in the worship of demigods enter into the darkest region of ignorance, and still more so do the worshippers of the impersonal absolute. And here, as the Prabhupada gives a bit of a purportful translation, because just like in text number 9, it said that somebody who is in avidya, they enter into darkness, and somebody who's has vidya, knowledge, enters more deeply into darkness. And it said that's supposed to make us think, is the knowledge that we have accurate? Because the real downfall is that if we think something we think is knowledge but actually is inaccurate, that causes us more trouble than having real knowledge. The same thing here. It says it says that someone who worships the demigods, they're in trouble, and somebody worse who worships the absolute. That's the plain meaning. And Prabhupada explains these two words. Instead of avidya and vidya, we have asambhutim and sambhutyam. Otherwise, all the words in these are the same as text number 9. And so Prabhupada says asambhutim, which he translates as demigods in the word for word and in the smooth translation, says the Sanskrit word asambhuti refers to those who have no independent existence. And so we've understood so much in our discussion of Isopanishad so far that there's only one entity that's independent and absolute. And that was one of the characteristics we found in him in text 8, is that he's independent, complete self-sufficient. I think is the specific terminology they used in that one. But otherwise, he's the source of everything. Everyone else, then everything else, has to come from him. He's the complete, and everything else is coming from him. And so Prabhupada says that these would be the verse would be referring to demigods because they are seeming controllers, and they're recommended in the Vedas that you worship them. So you might think that you're worshiping the proper thing, that here are these different devatas who are the controllers. But Prabhupada, or the Isopanishad mentioned even early on that the Lord controls those controllers, the ones who supply the wind and the rain, that He's controlling them. But people still may misconstrue it, that here's a Lord. Right? So he's saying that's what people are going to generally worship, that it's not the absolute. It would be the devatas. And then Sambhutyam says in the absolute. And Prabhupada says Sambhuti is the absolute personality of Godhead who is absolutely independent of everything. So there's no independence, and then there's full independence. So that's the difference here. And so just like when we were looking at knowledge, and we're looking at and saying that inaccurate knowledge hurts worse than ignorance. The same way we may think we're worshiping the absolute, but if our understanding of the absolute is wrong, that puts us in an even worse position than if we're worshiping the devatas or somebody who's not absolute. So we have to make sure that we understand clearly. We've been hearing from the beginning of Isopanishad, the whole thing is about the controller, Isha, the controller. So, and we've understood from the beginning that we have some relationship there. Right? And so we have to make sure we have and it's been trying to give us the correct understanding. Here's checking us. We got to make sure, absolutely make sure that the understanding is correct. Okay, so let's carry on to. Okay, so now what is the fallacy of worshiping things that are not that don't have independence? That's what we'll look at first, because it says that they also, those who are worshiping the devatas or that which has no independent existence, isn't good. It leads us towards darkness. We keep getting this kind of notion that we understand the Lord, we understand ourselves, we understand our relationship, and we understand that we have a certain choice. That if we act in one way, it's very good, and if we act another way, there's unhelpful consequences. Is that what you can say? So the fallacy of worshiping Asambhutim. Prabhupada gives some explanations in the purport. He said, it is stated in the Bhagavad Gita 7.23 that the worshippers of the demigods can go to the planets of the demigods. However, all planets in the material universe are temporary residences. The only permanent planets are the Vaikuntha Lokas. These are found in the spiritual sky where the personality of Godhead himself predominates. We'll hear about this a little bit more in text 14. Prabhupada's anticipating a little bit. And then he says in the Bhagavad Gita 7.23, again, he says, it is clearly stated that the results derived from worshiping the demigods are not permanent. Since the entire material universe is impermanent, whatever is achieved within the darkness of material existence is also impermanent. The question is how to obtain real and permanent life. So we already saw from last time, and actually we even saw from the beginning. In mantra 1 and 2, mantra 2, he mentions that if we understand the Lord's ownership and proprietorship, and we act in accordance with the place he's given to us, that we will be free from the bondage of karma. At that time, we didn't know that we're spirit souls, and we didn't really understand much about transcendence. So he just mentions being free from the bondage of karma. But in the purport, Prabhupada explains that makes you free from birth and death. Right? But it's actually hidden in there, but it's not really openly mentioned. Then later on in text 11, it says very clearly then, because by that time we've heard that we're not part of this world. We're spirits. We're ekatvam. We have a certain oneness with the Lord. So then it says that we are free from death, repeated death, and you have eternal life. So we already know that the proper result of a cultivation of knowledge is that. Anything that's below that threshold doesn't make it. So here Prabhupada is saying that this is the problem here. If we're going to worship something that has no independent existence, that's not permanent, such as the devatas, you can only get a similar result. So you can attain a position similar to them, but you can't attain eternal life. You can't attain deathlessness. And so at the last quote from the purport, it says, Prabhupada says, in the Bhagavad Gita 7.20.23, it is said that only unintelligent, bewildered persons, driven by a strong desire for sense gratification, worship the demigods for the temporary relief of temporary problems. I want to kind of remind that only unintelligent, bewildered persons driven by a strong desire for sense gratification. This causes us to be focused on the temporary material world and to take us away from the understanding of us as spirit souls. When we have strong desires for they're called the tanmatras, the sensory experiences. When we're really focused on those, right, then it takes our attention. It takes our attention, it takes our intelligence, and we tend to forget, even if we already know, that we're only the observers, that we're the soul. And it tends to bring us more in deeper connection with the surrounding temporary world. It makes us adira, is what we're going to find out later.
Prabhu, it talks about sense gratification.
Yeah.
Now, I understand the sense of maybe the taste and smell, which are pretty, I mean, I guess those really don't matter much. But even say you're trying to do the best for Krishna and ultimately don't you get a sense of satisfaction? There's a sense, maybe not sense of touch, smell, feel and all that, but there's a sense of achievement, sense of feeling good. And so when you say driven by a strong desire for sense gratification, I mean, isn't that, I mean, aren't I driven if I'm doing good to others and being a good soul?
Well,
Isn't there also a sense of gratification where I'm feeling
yes.
happy that I've achieved something and
Well, see, this is something we're going to talk a lot more about in the Bhagavad Gita. We'll analyze this more carefully. But if I'm doing something that maybe that's good for others and such things, and why am I feeling the good part? Am I feeling good because it makes me feel better about myself? This is a higher level of sense gratification. Because it also means not just the senses of touch, taste, smell, and hearing, but it's also the mind and also our self image. What happens ultimately in devotion, and see, of course, part of that also will happen is that when you are more concerned with others than just yourself, if it's less gross, you also come into a little closer touch with your soul. So there's a little bit of the soul by nature is happy. A little bit of that tends to come out. But if it's connected by thinking I'm doing good and I'm a good person, that's also a little bit it keeps you attached a little bit because that's your self image that's being if it's coming from massaging your self image. If it's coming really from just a desire to help, that's a different thing. This we'll have to talk about more in Bhagavad Gita when we talk about what who we really are. Because now to explain to answer your question very well now, I have to explain to you that you're a spirit soul and you're covered with a subtle body, manas, the mind, buddhi, intelligence, ahankara, also covered by the physical body. And I explained to how all those things work to give you a really satisfying answer to that. So what that sort of thing is a higher level, a much higher level of sense gratification. You'll get some of it because you're coming a little bit more in touch with the soul. What we're talking about ultimately is that if we try simply to please Krishna, then we'll get a different kind of happiness that comes directly from the contact of the soul with Krishna. So there's kind of gross sense gratification where we just want to enjoy the touches and the smells and the tastes and the sounds. There's those that deal with our self-image. Now I'm getting better, or now and then those that come in gross and subtle too. We can feel like I'm a very powerful person. People love me. This kind of stuff that's more selfish.
right, but
If we
right, yeah, that I think that is pretty clear cut. I mean, I don't think those feelings are good
Mhm,
feelings that I'm
mhm.
powerful
Yeah,
and all
yeah,
that, but just a
yeah,
feeling of bringing a smile to your face or just feeling good.
yeah.
I mean, that's a sense of gratification
Yeah.
in the sense that, and it's not
It,
that I'm powerful and I'm
yeah.
all that, but just that happiness
Well,
that you
if
get.
we are more we call in the mode of goodness, okay, if we are less selfish in such things, then we do get automatically a deeper connection with the self-satisfaction that's part of the soul. The more selfish we are, the less we have that, and the more we feel miserable all the time. So that kind of seeming like causeless happiness, like sometimes you just wake up for no good reason and you feel happy, that will come more often in the mode of goodness, and that's a little bit of a hint of you're getting a little bit of that's not so much sense gratification, but that's an experience of the soul a little bit. Okay, if we're doing good though, and we're feeling good about ourselves because we're doing good, that's a higher order. It's a better kind of sense gratification. But if it's completely just it feels good because for no good reason, that's more coming from the soul. We'll have to discuss this a lot more in depth. We don't really have time to. That's a good question, but it's kind of out of our purview right now. Okay, so let's right now focus on the part that you understand clearly.
Sure,
The things that are harmful. That will make perfect sense to you
sure.
here. We'll deal with this other thing in detail actually when we get to Bhagavad Gita. A very good question though, but we won't be able to finish the class. Okay, and so here it says, I'm saying here that continuing with the fallacy of worshiping a Sambhutam. From the very beginning of Sri Isopanishad, we have learned how the Lord is absolute and independent. In Mantra 4, we learned that he is the controller of the demigods. In Mantra 8, we heard how it is him who is fulfilling everyone's desire. So it's really clear from what we've learned so far who we're supposed to worship, and what we're supposed to worship. And so we really even shouldn't be in that situation anyway. If we are, we see that the problem is that it's temporary. You can't get any permanent benefit, and we're already up to the standard of eternal life. Okay. And in mantra 11, we learned that the objective is to transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. In mantra 2, we heard how simply by recognizing the Lord as the owner and controller that we become free from the bondage of karma. Karma binds us to the cycle of birth and death. And Sri Isopanishad unequivocally recommends that the Lord be our only object of worship. So if we worship anything else, we're really going against Sri Isopanishad as well. It's very clear. We should understand that. That really shouldn't be a problem for us. Okay? So again, coming back to the same thing, in the same way that having false knowledge is worse than plain ignorance, worshipping a false conception of the absolute is worse than worshipping the demigods. People with a false conception are resistant to the truth they already know and may mislead others by preaching their own understanding. Fortunately, Sri Isopanishad is dedicated to giving us the proper understanding of the absolute. So if we follow what we've heard from Isopanishad, we're out of danger on both of those counts. No asambhutim and no incorrect sambhutim. Okay. Now here, this to me is was one of my favorite actually passages of Prabhupada's purports. Maybe in one of the ones I like, even from all of his work, but to speak, and especially from the Isopanishad, because he really explains nicely something that's difficult to understand and confuses a lot of people. So I'm going to quote this whole passage, and then I'm going to look at little pieces of it, and we'll look at it a little bit more carefully. Because this is a common way that the absolute is misunderstood. And Prabhupada deals in both this purport and the future purports in the next verse about how people misunderstand what the absolute is. And we have heard that that's even worse than worshiping the devatas. So let's go here. This is from the purport. Prabhupada says, many philosophers and great rishis, or mystics, try to distinguish the absolute from the relative by their tiny brain power. This can only help them reach the negative conception of the absolute without realizing any positive trace of the absolute. Definition of the absolute by negation is not complete. Such negative definitions lead one to create a concept of one's own. Thus one imagines that the absolute must be formless and without qualities. Such negative qualities are simply the reversals of relative material qualities and are therefore also relative. By conceiving of the absolute in this way, one can at the utmost reach the impersonal effulgence of God known as Brahman, but one cannot make further progress to Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Okay, so let's try to break it down bit by bit because Prabhupada says a lot very succinctly there. So let's try to look at it a little bit carefully. So let's take the first portion. Many philosophers and great rishis, or mystics, try to distinguish the absolute from the relative by their tiny brain power. This can only help them reach the negative conception of the absolute without realizing any positive trace of the absolute. Definition of the absolute by negation is not complete. So famously in the Vedic tradition, it's neti neti. Right? Not this, not this. And we've understood that the absolute truth is the source of everything else. So if I take anything in this room and say, this is not the absolute, 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 because it's not the source of everything else. So the persons who are trying to just use their intelligence, their power of reasoning, logic, it's called anuman, following the process of the mind, to try to understand what would the absolute be like. If there's something that's absolute, not just relative, if there's a source of everything, what would it be like? So it can't be any of these things because otherwise they're not the source of everything else. They say not this, not this. Okay? So if one tries to use logic in discovering the absolute source of everything, one will reason that any particular thing, being only a portion of reality, cannot be the absolute. So after you do that, though, you still have to ask yourself the question, but what is it? It's not this, not this, not this, but what is it? Right? You're still left with that question. You know what it's not. It's called in the West. It's called the via negativa, the negative philosophy. They do the same thing in Western theology. So what is it though? Okay. Prabhupada says such negative definitions lead one to create a concept of one's own, and this is what's interesting. So this is often such thinkers will consider that since the absolute is very different from anything they have experienced, that it cannot be properly expressed in words or thoughts. You'll hear that a lot of times. You try to discuss with them, and then they'll say, but it can't be understood in words, and it can't be understood even by thoughts. And of course, there's even the Western philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said the same thing. He said that God was an unintelligible concept because says we know what black or red or a chair is. We have experience of it. We don't even know what the word God refers to. And so we say if we haven't experienced the absolute, then we don't have a word for it. And if you haven't experienced it, you can't have even a proper thought about it. So they'll tell you it's just words, it's just thoughts. You can't conceive of it. Okay. Now, however, if you say that, of course you're using words to say it, but even if you believe that's true, then the logical implication of not being able to express it in words or thoughts is that one should just be quiet and stop thinking about it. All right? Which then just means you admit that you have no idea, or that you're stuck with that. You know what it's not, but you don't know what it is. And thinkers hate that kind of stuff. They hate not to know what it is. And so they can't resist. They have to try to come up with something. It's just by nature, people who are philosophical, who are interested or curious, they can't help but try to violate their own principle. So they try to come up with something. So what do? It says, thus one imagines the absolute must be formless and without qualities. Such negative qualities are simply the reversals of relative material qualities, and are therefore also relative. So Prabhupada says. So they will consider that the absolute cannot have even any of the qualities or characteristics of the things that we experience, since having any particular quality would be a limitation and thus disqualify it as absolute. And Srila Prabhupada has already addressed this argument in the invocation, where he said that the lack of a form or any other quality for that matter would constitute a limitation. That's what people say. And so that's what they think. So they say, okay, now let me just try to think of something that's unlike anything I've ever thought about. Right? No qualities, no form, no color, no this, no that. No. But of course, this is a thought. Right? They've already said they can't conceive of it, but now they try to conceive it because he just can't resist. So he said, well, it's completely other. So let me try to conceive of something that's completely other. And you still don't come up with anything solid. And so Prabhupada says, by conceiving of the absolute in this way, one can at the utmost reach the impersonal effulgence of God, known as Brahman, but one cannot make further progress to Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Okay? So sometimes they'll come to the notion, especially if they hear about this notion of Brahman, this unified, unchanging existence. So well, that must be the absolute. That fits our negative definitions the best of anything. But they can't. But there's no basis for any further understanding. And we've already got in Isopanishad a much more sophisticated understanding of the absolute that also fixes that problem that Prabhupada mentioned, that if he doesn't have any form or qualities, that's also a limitation. So what we settled upon, so the Sri Isopanishad has revealed to us a highly sophisticated conception that shows how the absolute is truly unlimited. We've talked about that quite a bit in the earlier verses. How he can have a form, how he can act, but it's not an ordinary form like we experience here. It's not limited because he can have as many of them as he wants. He can be everywhere at once or no place. We explain in detail about what that means. He can make any reality he likes immediately. It does. I mean, it just doesn't get more unlimited than that. It just really doesn't. But you'll never come to that understanding just by trying to pondering it. You can ponder it. People have been pondering this stuff for thousands of years, and they'll never come up with something like that. It's just too far out. This notion of, and that is explained in the invocation. This complete thing which produces complete things and remains complete. It's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. So nobody comes up with that. So just without revelation, without instruction from above, you never come any higher. And so you just start thinking it's something completely unlike anything I've experienced, and maybe that's the Brahman. That's this part. You can't come up with anything concrete at all. And that's what happens. People just get stuck at that level. Those that believe the absolute is impersonal cannot appreciate the significance of the Lord when he appears on earth. Krishna mentions this in Bhagavad Gita, and Prabhupada quotes it also. They consider him a powerful demigod or simply a spiritual realized being. Those that think the world is an illusion consider him part of the illusion. They may consider that they can become incarnations themselves by spiritual practice and try to imitate his activities. So these are the different kind of ways to even misunderstand God himself versus a misunderstanding of what the absolute is. But then even when the absolute appears in person, they're not able to understand that properly because it's just too mind-blowing. If you don't have that information, you don't know how to process the fact that here's this entity in front of you. Here's Krishna. So immediately you try to understand him in ways that you can understand. You use the categories that are already in your brain, and you try to understand him in that way. So it's the absolute having taken a limited form to interact with you, right? But he's not unlimited. Um, uh, he's maybe he's just the most powerful of all the entities around, but he's not all powerful. In Shankaracharya's philosophy, they say everything except Brahman is an illusion. So he's part of the illusion. If there's a form, there has to be part of the illusion. And then otherwise, there's this notion of oneness, right? If everything is coming from the absolute, everything, in one sense, is one with that. And so, especially if we understand ourselves to be spirits in some way, that if God appears, he just must be a realized being. And we can do the same thing. That's what made him special. And so then you have people who can think they can become incarnations. They can become God. You can become God. You're God, I'm God, everybody's God. Well, everybody is related to God. And we know that part. There's a certain truth to the oneness. But when it's not balanced out with the fact that there's only one source of everything, then it becomes a problem. And leads to acting improperly and harmfully. So here in the purport it says this: the ignorant pseudo-religionists and the manufacturers of so-called incarnations, who directly violate the Vedic injunctions, are liable to enter into the darkest region of the universe because they mislead those who follow them. These impersonalists generally pose themselves as incarnations of God to foolish persons who have no knowledge of Vedic wisdom. If such foolish men have any knowledge at all, it is more dangerous in their hands than ignorance itself. Selection from the purport, and another one from the purport. By a false display of religious sentiments, they present a show of devotional service while indulging in all sorts of immoral activities. In this way, they pass as spiritual masters and devotees of God. Such violators of religious principles have no respect for the authoritative acharyas, the holy teachers, in the strict disciplic succession. So if we're all on an equal footing, and simply spiritual realization makes you divine, and then you imitate Krishna's activities. So you have people who will, want to enjoy the wives of their disciples because Krishna had danced with the gopis, things like that. No, Krishna did it, therefore I can do it. He was spiritually realized. I'm spiritually realized. That must be how spiritually realized entities act. And so, without receiving the knowledge from the proper sources, and we'll talk about that in the future texts. We have to receive the knowledge first of all, since you can't arrive at it through just use of your mind. You receive the proper knowledge, and then you receive how you apply it from a community of practitioners. And that saves you from all kind of difficulties that we have here. Okay. So the next text is mantra 13, and which tells us that there's a difference between worshiping the Asambhutim and the Asambhutyam. Okay. And that we should worship that which is absolute. We already kind of covered that quite a bit in text 12. And so that it's Anyad evahu sambhavad, anyadahur asambhavat, iti shushrumadhiranam yenastad vichachakshire. So it is said that one result is obtained by worshipping the supreme cause of all causes, and that another result is obtained by worshipping what is not supreme. All this is heard from the undisturbed authorities who clearly explained it. Again, we come back to the Dhiras. We colored them actually in our very first Bhakti Shastri class in the Nectar of Instruction. Those who are in control of their senses are the Dhiras, and they are fit to be spiritual masters. We'll find it again in Bhagavad Gita, and actually several times. Undisturbed authorities. So here's a couple of quotes from the purport. According to the Vedanta Sutra, Sambhuta is the source of birth. So we're getting Prabhupada gives us a little bit even broader definition of what we're talking about here. Sambhuta is the source of birth and sustenance as well as the reservoir that remains after annihilation. Janmadi, so it means birth, etc. comes from him, and so forth. So he says birth, sustenance, and destruction. So the absolute, we already mentioned, is the source of everything. In this mantra of Sri Isopanishad, the word Sambhavat, by worship of the Supreme Cause, is very significant. Lord Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and everything that exists has emanated from him. So we've already really discussed this a lot in Isopanishad that the complete has in the first mantra, Prabhupada gave us those alternate translations where he said that everything is expanded by his energies. He's present everywhere by super soul. He gave us, and so we've heard so many things about how he's the source of everything. That's the complete has that unique characteristic. Anyway, Prabhupada shared those extra things. So it's not only the absolute, but the source and sustenance of everything, source of birth, sustenance, and reservoir that remains after the creation, and the cause of worship of the supreme cause. It adds to that. They're all fairly familiar topics that we've covered already, though. Okay, so now Prabhupada also he didn't quite finish up from the last verse, and he gives a couple more in the purport, more misconceptions based upon impersonalism. He was talking about the improper conceptions of the absolute that gets us into big trouble. And he seems to carry over a little bit into this verse, so we thought we'd pick up on those. And here he says, but the so-called spiritual masters say that any and all paths will take one to the supreme goal. So this is a common understanding. We thought we had to bring this one up. Such mundane and compromising offers attract many foolish creatures who become puffed up with their manufactured methods of spiritual realization. The Vedic instructions, however, do not uphold them. Unless one has received knowledge from the bona fide spiritual master who is in the recognized line of disciplic succession, one can not have the real thing as it is. That's from the purport. And so I'll try to break that one down a little bit. The idea is that all types of worship are simply a temporary means to an end. So this is those especially that follow in the Shankaracharya line will say that ultimately we all just merge into Brahman. Worship of any kind has no permanent use, but it may be the process of worship helps the practitioner become detached to the things of this world. So it may be helpful in moving us to out of our really gross ignorance and selfishness. It may be a useful thing. When sufficient detachment arises, the worshiper gives up the worship and merges into Brahman. And so this happens. You hear this a lot, amongst people, that you can worship whoever you want, and it leads you to the same result. Okay? Hidden behind that, though, is a very important assumption. that at the very end of the process, you have to accept their worldview. They have a very definitive idea of what ultimate reality is, and you have to accept that. Otherwise, you're wrong. So they can say, you can worship Krishna. It's very nice. But if I say, I want to worship Krishna eternally, you can't do that. He takes you to the point of liberation, and then you give it up and realize that there's only oneness. There's no Krishna, there's no you, there's no difference between you and the worshipped, and you merge. So all these things, so in one sense, on the surface, it looks like they're very welcoming of all different paths and different attitudes. But at the last step, they have a very, very, very firm and uncompromising view of what the absolute reality is. And if you don't accept it, you're wrong. You're wrong.
So in this particular point, if you're following the impersonalist, then they would say, okay, Brahman is all that is.
Yeah.
That's why it works.
Yeah.
Whereas in the devotional path, it's much beyond that, where you need to realize Krishna as a person, develop a relationship.
The Isopanishad is talking like that, and that we'll see in the next text.
Those are the different views.
Yeah. Those are two different views. So the one on the surface appears to be more accommodating and welcoming and stuff, but it is completely also not negotiable. You can worship Krishna, but at the end, when it's time for liberation, you got to give it up. You can worship Shiva, you can worship, Jesus, you can worship Buddha, you can worship anybody you want. At the end, then you have to renounce that worship. Worship is a means to an end, and then it ends.
So they mean to say, like even if they worship me and you, but still they will reach that level.
Well, if that helps you to become selfless and detached, doesn't matter, because there's no intrinsic power to the worship. We're all part of the illusion. You see? Yeah, we're all part of illusion. So anything you do, you can do anything as long as that kind of builds your detachment, builds your understanding. Go ahead for that, but then you have to renounce it at the end. Okay?
If it is illusion, how do we know that it is a building of the understanding or not?
Because of detachment, it's a jnana vairagya. So anything that builds up your knowledge of your spirit and not material, and your renunciation of things, that's what they'll take a look at. So there's some objective measure there.
So, Prabhu, could you expand on the third bullet? When suppression detachment arises, the worshipper gives up the worship. Okay, so now I understand that you can use different paths, whether it's Jesus or Shiva and all that. But let's say that to become detached, so you can use different means to get detached. Now that you have become detached, it says the worshipper gives up the worship and merges into Brahman. What does that mean?
That means you realize that you're one. Okay, so they'll tell you like that there only exists an undifferentiated Brahman. And in fact, Shankaracharya he does this. So here's what he does. I'll give you his. He has the impersonalism in the most rigorous way. He bases it on the Vedas. And he tells you, he says that the Upanishads say that the absolute is one without a second. There's no two things. There's only the absolute. Now we've understood that in the way that the complete is connected to all of his other energies. So that makes a one. There's a unity there. At the same time, there's a one part of that unity is complete. So, but Shankaracharya takes that in a very literal sense. So he said there can't be any kind of manifestations, there can't be any energies, there can't be any creations. That would constitute two things. There would be there would be the creator and the created. Also, there would be a change, because also the Vedas say that it's changeless. The absolute is changeless. Now we understand that even though all of the different complete wholes come from the complete whole remains complete. That's unchanged. From him, a very literal sense, he says, if he creates something, then there's a change in him. Some change has happened. So he says, therefore, there's only Brahman. There's only this unified absolute reality. So what we're experiencing right here and now today is an illusion. And the way he puts it, he says, and he uses kind of Buddhist reasoning, because he was trying. His job was to bring the Vedas back out of when India was under the Buddhists. So he made an interpretation of the Vedas that would coincide with the teachings of the Buddhism of the day, the Majjhimika Buddhism. And so he said that you cannot say that the world exists, or you cannot properly say that it does not. So really, we're part. Everything, including ourselves, are part of the illusion. And when we come to knowledge, we kind of just realize we don't exist really. We don't even merge. Like today, most people say you know that you're a little soul and you'll merge into the light. But he wouldn't say even that, because if you have souls, that's two things and a change. So there's not even souls. We just imagine that we're separated. And then you basically just realize you don't exist, which is really, experientially, it's exactly the same thing as nirvana, where you cease to exist. The only way you could tell the difference is if you had somehow a privileged viewpoint to see what was going outside the universe. You'd either see that there's a Brahman only that exists and there's illusion, or just that these entities exist and stop existing. But personally, in either case, you cease to exist. You were just illusion in the first place. You're no longer there, or you were alive in Buddhism and you cease to exist.
Here, what illusion means? Illusion means just thinking wrongly, or actually you don't exist at all.
You don't exist. You can't be said to exist, and you can't said properly not to exist. There's no real existence to you. We don't. No souls, no bodies, nothing. It's just only Brahman. And somehow, when you as illusion come to understanding, then then the illusion also stops. You no longer experience the illusion. That's how it goes. So usually in these days, people say that you're a soul, and then you will merge with the Brahman, with the Brahman effulgence, and become you become part of that, just kind of like a drop in the ocean. Most of them consider that the drop kind of keeps its own identity. You think that you can feel the happiness of that. Otherwise, it not actually just dissolve. But that's what they'll say. And so they say that your worship is just a means to an end. And so if I'm worshiping Krishna, I do that up to a certain point, and then I realize that Krishna is not the absolute, and I'm not the absolute, and we're all only Brahman exists, and I merge with that. I give up my worship. I'm simply a part of that Brahman, a drop in that ocean.
So you could give a counter argument as well, say, okay, if the complete whole creates others which are complete, then these complete, when they merge into the complete, also changes. So that philosophy reverse way is also in.
Yeah. Because most of the impersonalism you see these days are not strictly following Shankaracharya's thing. Yeah. So they're not he was very rigorous, and he was applying because he had a specific purpose to try to reestablish the Vedas. So you see, the Vedas are saying the same thing as we believe. So then they would come back again. So usually people are not so rigorous these days. It's a little bit more, so that it would be open to those things. But they're not really following strictly his line of reasoning anyway, so it doesn't have much effect on them. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so the fact is, Prabhupada says that worship of the demigods brings one to their planets within the world, while worship of the Supreme takes one to the Supreme. And Prabhupada says, a person who has purchased a ticket for Calcutta can reach Calcutta, but not Bombay. So, we feel, from our understanding is that the different types of worship take you to different places. And they have legitimate purposes. Worshipping the Devatas take you to their planets. Worshipping the Lord takes you to them. They're not all, they don't give the exact same result, and you don't give them up necessarily. Okay, then there's last more misconceptions based upon impersonalism. Prabhupada says, the simple way to worship the Supreme Lord in this age of disturbance is to hear and chant about his great activities. The mental speculators, however, think that the activities of the Lord are imaginary. Therefore, they refrain from hearing of them and invent some word jugglery without any substance to divert the attention of the innocent masses of people. And here's the main thing: instead of hearing of the activities of Lord Krishna, such pseudo spiritual masters advertise themselves by inducing their followers to sing about them. Somebody was mentioning, was you mentioning that I won't mention names here, but there was somebody who's claiming to be an incarnation who had all these bhajans about him. They were all standard bhajans about the Lord, and they just substituted his name. So this stuff happens kind of common because you think you can become God. There's no actual supreme, and so you are just as if you become spiritually realized. That's what it means to be. And Prabhupada says, certainly half-educated spiritual leaders who are disturbed by the tides of material existence cannot know him fully. They try to make some compromise by making the mass of humanity the object of worship. Daridra Narayan, Prabhupada talks about this a lot. But they do not know that such worship is only a myth because the masses are imperfect. The attempt by these so-called spiritual leaders is something like pouring water on the leaves of a tree instead of the root. The natural process is to pour water on the root, but such disturbed leaders are more attractive to the leaves than the root. So also if we say everything is connected with the absolute, that means everybody is God. So people who are suffering are poor, hungry, and such. They call them Daridra Narayan, the poor Narayan or unfortunate Narayan. And so that service to man is service to God. Now our conception is that everyone is very dear to God. And as Prabhupada say here, see. Yeah, let's go on to the next one. He'll explain this kind of nicely. But that because everything is an emanation of Krishna, and all the souls are very dear to him in particular. And so it's good to do good for others. This is a good thing. But we do it because it pleases the Lord. And the best thing Prabhupada says here, he says, the living being is perpetually suffering in different types of bodies, from the material miseries of birth, old age, disease, and death. The human form of life offers one a chance to get out of this entanglement simply by reestablishing the lost relationship between the living entity and the Supreme Lord. The Lord comes personally to teach this philosophy of surrender unto the Supreme, the Sambhuta. Real service to humanity is rendered when one teaches surrender to and worship of the Supreme Lord with full love and energy. That is the instruction of Sri Isopanishad in this mantra. So instead of seeing service to human beings as service to God, we have to feeding and clothing and housing. We also feed people, but we try to give them Krishna prasadam, which will benefit them spiritually. So the real welfare is to help them to overcome all of their troubles permanently. And we do so not because they're God, but because they're dear to God. That's the basis of our love for others. Not that they're God who's poor and now need to be saved, but they're dear to God and we feel very, very badly for their suffering and want to relieve it in some way.
And that is service.
And that's service to God because we've understood the connection between them and God, not that they are God. And that's an important distinction. It doesn't mean that we're callous to people suffering. In fact, we're supposed to be we're supposed to be para dukkha dukhi. We feel very acutely people suffering. Not that we simply worship God and let people, because we understand their connection. We read already in the previous verses how the Lord and the spirit souls in every body. But just helping somebody's body is not the same thing as serving the Lord. And it's not doing good service for them either. So if we develop a connection with Krishna, we will feel connected with everybody because they're all his energies and expansions. But if we take them to be Krishna personally, and Prabhupada says it's like pouring water on the leaf of the tree. Krishna is the root of the tree, the source of it, and the leaves are part of the manifestations. That's in Bhagavatam. It says you should feed the stomach, and that helps the whole body. And you should pour water on the roots of the tree, and that helps the whole tree. So also by satisfying the Lord, that makes things that changes how things happen on the earth also. And if the Lord is satisfied, circumstances on the earth improve. Prabhupada mentions this in Bhagavatam. When he mentioned during in the ninth canto, he talks about Lord Ramachandra. And he says when Lord Ramachandra was personally present, everything was beautiful on earth. And he says nobody even died if they didn't want to. And he said, and that was because the Supreme Lord was personally present. He said, in this age, the Lord is present by his holy name. And so he said, if the holy name is spread and people chant Hare Krishna, he says, a similar situation, he says, immediately can obtain. Because he's the source and sustenance of everything. If he's pleased, then also things change. That's what he means by watering the leaves. You just try to feed the hungry. What if you either help them in a better way, also try to make them relieve their sufferings completely, permanently, by becoming liberated, and also by worshiping the Lord, you help everybody indirectly by making things better. The worship of the Lord changes how things happen on this world. It's because of so many impious activities that so many disasters are happening. Things the threefold miseries: bodies and mind, the things that come from nature, the forces of nature, and from other entities. So we can change. We can change. They used to blame the kings when there were natural disasters. Try to go to, I mean, poor president already has enough criticism, but he goes say, hey, there was an earthquake over there, it's your fault. Poor guy's already got enough trouble, but he doesn't deserve it. But that's what they would do, because the king was supposed to keep spiritual order. Right? And so if Dharma was happening properly, you wouldn't have big natural disasters. That's really how it worked. So today we just we blame him for everything, and now we also blame him for earthquakes. Oh, unfair, poor guy. Okay. So it says the system of hearing from undisturbed authorities. This also comes from the purport. Is approved in this mantra. Unless one hears from a bona fide acharya who is never disturbed by the changes of the material world, one cannot have the real key to transcendental knowledge. The bona fide spiritual master who has also heard the Shruti mantras or Vedic knowledge from his undisturbed acharya never presents anything that is not mentioned in the Vedic literature. Unless one has received knowledge from the bona fide spiritual master who is in the recognized line of disciplic succession, one cannot have the real thing as it is. And so a little bit of a breakdown here. We already understood the Lord cannot be known can be known only by revelation. We already saw how the intellectual speculation leads only to impersonalism. Knowledge of the Absolute is difficult for those very much attached to the pleasures of the senses and very averse to the unpleasant sensations. This is why the dhiras are important. They're sober, they can understand things as they are. Right now, we can be bought and sold. What's the price? What's your price? What's your price? What's your price? And we'll think that, or if something is really, pleasing to us, we'll think we can make an exception. Well, it's not so bad if I cheat just a little bit. It's not too bad. So we can't see things objectively when we have strong desires and we need to fulfill them. When we're peaceful and happy and detached, we can see things objectively. Otherwise, our own self-interest, because you can't have, if you have a talent contest for children, you cannot have the parents as the judges. Very few of them will judge. They will all judge, their own child did the best. Maybe some will be fair-minded, but that's why also even judges, they recuse themselves if there's a conflict of interest. They're having the lawsuit between Apple and Samsung, and they own a lot of Apple stock. They'll say, I can't try this case because even if they try, the Apple arguments are just going to sound better than those Samsung ones.
Is there a word missing there? The last sentence. How to properly worship. If we want to learn about the Absolute and how to properly worship, one needs to off. What is the word between
Oh,
that?
okay. One needs to be part of a living tradition. Yeah, there is. One needs to be part of a living tradition where the knowledge is both received and practiced. So this is why it says the understanding of the soul and of the absolute can only be had by the dhiras, the undisturbed authorities. And so if we want to understand about the absolute, then we need to also have an understanding of how to practice it, how to do with it. We receive the knowledge properly, but then how to use it. So we have a community of practitioners. That's what's called the dhiras and the acharyas and the parampara line. And here's what we know, and here's how to properly deal with it. And that's stressed in these verses. So we're part of a living tradition.
Or explain on the first bullet point, half,
Uh-huh.
the Lord cannot be known only.
Oh, okay. Typos. I have to correct these things. Okay. Can only be known.
Can only
Be known. Typos. Couple of typos here. It was things are can only be known. I was going to say I had originally said cannot be known by speculation, and then I didn't. Okay, so sorry about that. It's a typo.
Revelation means revealing himself.
Can only be known by revelation. Yeah, yeah, he reveals. It's revealed to us. We can't figure it out, so it has to be. This is what it is. We can go up to a certain level by our brains, and then we say, but then we still don't know. We know what it's not, but we don't know what it is. So it's revealed. Yeah, sorry about the typos there. I'll correct those when the class is over. It gives the exact opposite meaning. Okay, so I'll conclude with mantra 13. With a quote from the purport again. Non-devotees are under the sway of passion and ignorance. One who is in passion cannot become detached from material hankering, and one who is in ignorance cannot know what he is or what the Lord is. So again, we're talking about supporting the dhira concept here. Thus, when one is in passion or ignorance, there is no chance for self-realization, however much one may play the part of a religionist. For a devotee, the modes of passion and ignorance are removed by the grace of the Lord. So we'll talk about that a little bit here at the end of mantra 14. Again, we'll revisit the dhira concept because okay, so we're here attaining the Lord's abode in mantra 14. We're kind of running out of time here, as unfortunately, because it's sambhutim cha vinasham cha yastadvedo bhayam saha vinashena mrityum tirtva sambhutyam mritam ashnute. One should know perfectly the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna and his transcendental name, form, qualities, and pastimes, as well as the temporary material creation with its temporary demigods, men and animals. When one knows these, he surpasses death and the ephemeral cosmic manifestation with it. And in the eternal kingdom of God, he enjoys his eternal life of bliss and knowledge. So Prabhupada also has a pretty he expanded the translation quite a bit, a little purportful, but he says, if you know that Sambhutim, the Lord, and you also know about the Vinasham, things that are temporary. Like here it says those things that are temporary manifestations. If you know them both together, then you will, just like it said before, that you will be free from death and you will have deathlessness. But here they mentioned that you will be free, you'll transcend vinashana, everything that's temporary, and you'll be sambucha, amrita. So you'll have the kind of immortality, the kind of deathlessness that happens with the Supreme. This is in the eternal kingdom of God. So this is more than. And in text 11, it said that you would be free from death. You will be tirtva mrityum tirtva, surpassing death, and you would have vidyamritam. You would have that deathlessness that comes from knowledge, right? And you will enjoy that. Now you get. He says it very clearly that you enjoy that deathlessness that comes with God. What do you say? So I mentioned there's a kind of a progression here, the Sambutya in the eternal kingdom of God. In mantra 2, it said Nakarma Lipyate. You will, if you follow the principle of Ishavasham and acknowledge the Lord as the controller and the owner, and stay in your place. You find that the Lord has made a place for you, and you don't try to take things that aren't yours. That kind of activity will not bind you to the law of karma. Then Mantra 11, he said, you transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. Okay, that really was hinted at even in the karma lipute, because this is that provides the basis for you to transcend birth and death. But at that time, we didn't know that we're spirit souls, and we didn't know that much about the transcendence of the Lord. Mantra 14, it says, they add something more. It says, surpasses death and the ephemeral cosmic manifestation with it. And in the eternal kingdom of God, he enjoys his eternal life of bliss and knowledge. So he mentions also all the things, everything temporary is gone. You surpass that, you surpass death, so that means that you go someplace else, go into the spiritual world. So we're gradually getting more focused and bringing all the knowledge that we've got together. Okay, so let's take a look here. Prabhupada has a couple of things from the purport. By its so-called advancement of knowledge, human civilization has created many material things, including spaceships and atomic energy, yet it has failed to create a situation in which people need not die, take birth again, become old, or suffer from disease. So again, we're looking at this as we have to learn both side by side. We have to learn about God, the Absolute, and we have to learn about the Vinasham, these temporary things, in order to achieve this thing. We have to understand both. And so Prabhupada is saying, we're understanding now the temporary things. Right? So we consider ourselves, technologically and materially advanced, but these little problems still remain: birth, death, old age, and disease. The duration of life varies according to species. Lord Brahma, the chief living being within this material universe, lives for millions and millions of years, while a minute germ lives for some hours only. But no one in the material world can survive eternally, and therefore the entire material universe is called Martya Loka, or the place of death. So this is understanding the Nasham. And then he says in the purport, if we want to put an end to this process of repeated birth and death, as well as the concomitant factors of old age and disease, we must try to enter the spiritual planets, where one can live eternally in the association of Lord Krishna or his plenary expansions, his Narayan forms. And then another one, he says, this is the Lord's last instruction in Bhagavad Gita: give up all other processes and just surrender unto me alone. Unfortunately, foolish men have misinterpreted this prime teaching and misled the masses of people in diverse ways. People have been urged to open hospitals, but not to educate themselves to enter into the spiritual kingdom by devotional service. They have been taught to take interest only in temporary relief work, which can never bring real happiness to the living entity. Mostly he says that they open hospitals, but that not to educate themselves. So there's nothing wrong with hospitals in particular, but he says that they said not to educate themselves. Here it says that they take an interest only in temporary relief work, which can never bring real happiness to the living entity. They start varieties of public and semi-governmental institutions to tackle the devastating power of nature, but they don't know how to pacify insurmountable nature. It just doesn't work. They're trying to make heaven on earth, but this doesn't work. So here the last slide says, we understand the opportunity presented by the worship of the Lord, surpassing deathlessness, all temporary things, and living with the Lord. Then we will be eager to take up the process. If we also understand the guaranteed long-term failure of any other enterprise, then, this is another typo, then we will more easily become dhira and become more focused and steady on the path. So there's twofold things there. So we tend to always think optimistically about this world, and because we're so used to it. We've been here so long. So we have to understand first the opportunity that's being given to us and how wonderful that is. But if we don't understand how everything else that's temporary ultimately fails, then we'll be doing both things. We'll be trying to advance materially and trying to advance spiritually. We won't be dhira. Because the dhira means, right, that you're not affected by the material things. You have a certain level of detachment. You're focused only on the spiritual aspect. As soon as we think it's very important, life here, that I can do something permanent, something important, then I put my some love and attention into it. And so that interferes with our steady practice. That's why we our practice tends to be unsteady. We want to have both. We want to have the best of both worlds. But they're antithetical to one another. You can't have it. The more material happiness we want, the less spiritual success we'll have. They're inversely proportional to one another. You just can't. So therefore, that's why it says you have to understand both. You have to understand that this is just not going to get you anywhere, ultimately.
That's why Prabhupada talks often in his lectures about Mukta Vairagya. Means having the kind of enunciation where you can uh, appropriately utilize, see everything as part and parcel of Krishna, as from his energies, and then utilize it in his service.
Yeah.
So even having the riches or material benefits, to appropriately engage it in his service. So
Yeah, we don't have to. We don't have to be. We don't have to. We don't renounce in kind of a normal Gyani way of doing it. We talked about that in the nectar of instruction, how we control the senses.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about that. But here, but still, in either case, so the reason why we do that too is that we realize that they're not independent. They're only there to be used in the Lord's service, not for our own situation. So the point here holds that way, that you have to understand, what is my purpose. I won't be inclined to serve the Lord with everything if I think that there's something valuable here in this world. My service will be unsteady. That's what we have. We have the unsteady devotional service because we still give too much regard to the material. So it takes therefore our service attitude increases and decreases. This is a thick and thin. So the technique we use to give it up is the Yukta Vairagya, but we have to have this understanding, otherwise even that we won't be inclined to do it. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. We have a little bit of time left. I'm going to unmute. I'm going to try to find the conference call people and unmute. Oh, we got quite a few questions here. Okay, okay, okay. I'm gonna unmute and see what we have here. I just see messages. Okay, I'm gonna unmute everybody. I gotta unmute my little speakers here. And I'll see. I'll unmute people and see if there's anything. Otherwise, okay, unmute. Okay, so we're unmuted. If people have questions that are listening to the conference call, they can try them now, and otherwise people here also. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, thank you so much, actually. And since I was planning, like I will not come today, but I got the advantage of joining online.
It worked okay.
Yeah, it works absolutely good.
Okay, that's good to hear. So I guess the conference call, the online meeting worked pretty good. People can see the PowerPoint and things. So excellent. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so you. Oh, okay. Somebody else?
I was asking a question about the focus about Shiva, and also if there was like procedures for Shiva, especially when surrounded by a lot of surrounded by a lot of chaotic energy.
Right. Well, that's something that we learn gradually, and so we try, like, this is something like, it's an excellent question, because we all are surrounded by all kinds of chaos and turmoil and turbulence, and how are we to remain steady in that kind of circumstance? So that's something that we develop in our sadhana. It's something that we have to, we actually, sometimes being faced with all the chaos and different things around us helps us to call attention to the fact where we're not understanding things correctly, where we don't see things in a spiritual way, and we can recognize how we can deepen our understanding Also, through our spiritual practice, we're supposed to be connecting deeper with ourselves and with the Lord. So through our practice of sadhana, we should gain naturally some more ability to be peaceful amidst the chaos, but otherwise we may also have to address certain things. What really bothers us and why? And where are we misunderstanding that? Because we have theory where we understand that everything is the Lord's energy, that everything is under the Lord's control, and that we're trying to do our best to understand and to serve Him. But then there's practical application. And so we will find that although we know that we should be tolerant of others, we should be tolerant of circumstances, we should try to remember the Lord constantly, that we don't. That certain things trigger us, certain things disturb us, right? And those are invitations to reflect. How can we deepen our practice? How can we deepen our understanding, either of those who are causing, sometimes we have to understand better those people who are disturbing us. Where are we not applying the philosophy as well as we could? So it's an ongoing process, but our spiritual practice and the spiritual teachings will help us to develop in that way. So, Prabhu, you had one? I had a question.
In this verse, translation 14 words, like one should know perfectly the personality of Godhead and pastimes and temporary material creation. So what actually perfectly means? Because it looks more uh, uh, apt for me to see if one should know on a high level. Uh, I mean about the material creation, because we cannot know even God perfectly, even the material creation, animals, and
Well, it just means as well as we can. As well, we should understand as well as we possibly can, given the information that we have. So we should apply ourselves to understanding both of those things, understanding as much as we can. God, we have this. The whole Isopanishad has been giving us increasing understanding of who God is, how He acts, and that kind of stuff. So we should apply ourselves to that knowledge. We should try to apply the knowledge by following His instructions and by worshiping Him. Right? And that will increase our level of knowledge. The same way we should try to understand the temporary nature of everything else. So we understand them to the best of our ability. Mm.
it is understanding, but not gathering information, like going to.
It also means practical application. We have to practically apply what we learned here. And that's practical application. Prabhupada often calls realization. And it just means that you understand it well enough to know how to use it. That's vijnana, scientific knowledge. It means you can apply it. That's why the spiritual teachers are so important. They can help you to apply the knowledge. The Brahmins in traditional Vedic culture, they would tell you have a problem. They know how to apply the Vedic teachings to that particular problem. So we need to know how to apply the teachings to our lives, and that takes deeper understanding. Anything else? So Prabhu was wanting us to have kind of a little bit of a review. He was suggesting that to me yesterday. We didn't know if we were going to have enough time, but let's take a look, kind of a broad summary of where we've come so far. Because there's recurring themes that we have in the Isopanishad. It started up in the very first invocation, right, with understanding that there's this, because we mentioned the title Isopanishad means the understanding the Isha, the controller. That's the topic, the main topic of this is Isha. And we understood, first of all, from the invocation that the Isha is really special, has this unique property of being complete, expanding so many completes, and remaining complete. Nobody's ever thought of that before. And then we understood from the next one that we have a relationship there. That means He's the owner and controller, and that also we have a place in this world. And that if we and so that in some sense we have some connection with that amazing controller. That we follow the guidelines that's been given to us. Then we mentioned the benefits of that if we do that, we'll become free from karma. And then it's mentioned, of course, if we don't, Prabhupada mentions that the human life is one of responsibility, and the consequences if we don't do that. Okay? And then as we moved on, we heard more about details about this controller. We heard about how his amazing powers. You know, it kind of more or less followed from the invocation. But what does that mean? We saw the implications: how he can be near and far, inside and outside, walk but not walk. How he has how he's not embodied. He has but he has a form that has no veins. It's not like a body like ours. We heard many different other details about him, including then how he's how he's also with us in every body. We also then found out more information about us, that we, because we are not just entities here that should follow what the Lord says, but we are souls, a katvam, that have a certain oneness with Him, which then implied that there's a relationship deeper than just obedience and just, okay, here's your role in life, you follow that. That's what the first mantra says. But then it says there's a katvam. We're the same substance as He is. And He's right there with us. It implies this relationship, and it implies the possibility of transcendence. In the first verse, we didn't know about that. So they don't talk about deathlessness and freedom from birth, from death. He just says freedom from karma. But then it explains that, and how we see everything connected with the Lord. How we can be related, on a moment to moment basis. And then then we have the 6 verses we've talked about in the last two sessions. Again, if we do this, it's very good for us. If we don't, it's not so good. All right, so we need to take advantage of the information that we've been given. And if we do that properly, then we come to where we came today. That we can be in the situation where we live with God eternally. That's a kind of real thumbnail. And then the next 4 verses will sum everything up. They're in the form of a prayer. They're going to give some further information, but more than anything, it's going to give an attitude and an understanding. See, prayers have had that unique capacity that they're also practical application. Knowing everything you know, what should be your attitude? And so instead of just the informational verses like we've gotten so far, we're going to get prayers. These 4 verses are 4 prayers of someone who has understood what's been given to them in the Isopanishad thus far. So it gives a concrete instance of application if you understand everything. So it's really cool. That's why I saved those 4 for one particular class. So we understand first the existence of the controller. We understand initial a relationship with him. We then understand more about him. We understand more about ourselves, and then more about that relationship. And then if we take that knowledge and apply it, we have that opportunity to live with God eternally. I'll say that's kind of not a decent summary of the whole thing, really. Kind of, it's a thumbnail one, but that's kind of what's happening here. If you want to see the whole flow of it.
What was your question?
You have another question?
Yeah, overall, what can I ask you?
Sure, you can ask the question.
So one of the things I've heard over and over again was Isopanishad was such a pivotal literature in converting or convincing the people who are of the Western mentality, the advancement, material advancement. They read this and it was very convincing that reality is something else. So one of the things when I was reading the purport was that the most resource, the origin without origin, the creator of all, the absolute, is fully conscious, 100%, totally conscious.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Talked about how he's fully conscious. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And whereas the voidism, impersonalism, to take to the other extreme, not being it's actually, it emerges, it goes to a zero, nothing. Right? That's such a contrast that I see in the philosophy that is presented by Upanishad and the voidism. So what you think that is that I take that as a kind of one big statement as to why Shupanishad is so
That is interesting because really what Prabhupada says that usually part of the root of the attraction for the impersonalist philosophy is the misery, ironically, of existence in this world. It's interesting because so they think that they really want something that's completely different from existence here. So that having a form is limiting to them. They feel that limitation, that you never get as much happiness as you want. And they feel that's because of isolation. You see, we're separated. We feel separated. So therefore we feel alone, we feel incomplete, we feel needy. So they have this notion of just kind of merging into this great light to take away all the pain and misery. Right? So it's a natural thing. They are understanding the miseries of this world, but they don't know how to find a remedy for it. So it's just let me just merge into the absolute and you know there's I mean I think there's consciousness there, but it's just there's no variety, there's nothing happening. You're just you're at this level called it's called Brahmananda, where you're just existing. It's a pleasant existence, but you're just existing. It's nothing's happening there. It's stable, but no pains, no troubles, no wants, no needs. Right? But the understanding of the personalist thing is that you take that happiness and you build it. You see, by having spiritual variety that's not separated. You have because there's connection there. You see, the Lord has understood that just being the controller of everything and being able to do everything He likes is not fully satisfying. So He's created entities like us, where we can actually have relationship. So in this world, our relationships are always limited in their effectiveness, of course, but not just by our bodies getting old and dying, but we all feel neediness inside, and we have a certain thing we want out of the relationship. It's not a pure relationship. On the spiritual level, you only think of the welfare of the other. So that takes that Brahmananda pleasure and magnifies it unlimited numbers of times. So all the things that people think are the cause of their unhappiness, having a form, having multiple entities, this kind of stuff, that they see that as the cause of their suffering, that they feel they want to get rid of as the only way to do it. Actually, it's changed. As a Kattva, we have a spiritual form, and God has a spiritual form, but we're not needy. Our basis, our root state is we're fully satisfied. But then by trying to give to the other, give love to the other, that happiness is greatly expanded.
Can you please define active form and a bit elaboration?
Kattva just means it's one, oneness is the blunt name of it. And Prabhupada he says we're one in interest, we're one in substance, you know, so it means we're really intimately connected. So we're both spiritual, like Krishna is spiritual, we're spiritual. We have the same substance. We also, as Prabhupada talks about, says like we're kind of a sample. He says we have so many of the qualities in smaller quantity than Krishna has. So we're persons like Krishna. So a lot of the same kind of thing. So we're the same kind of thing, and we're also the same things in some ways. Right? But smaller versions. He says like you take a drop of the ocean, you can analyze it chemically. It has the same chemical composition as the ocean, but one is small and one is big. But but it's the same substance. So we're spiritual entities, not material things. He is spiritual. Also means we have a form and a personality, just like he does, because so we're samples of that. Yeah? That's the katma. And it shows our close connection. See, if we're just material things that he created, he's a spiritual entity with, there's not much relationship there. But here we're also eternal spiritual entities that have the capacity for relationship.
So at the limit, the Lord's interest to serve a devotee is equal to devotee's interest to serve the Lord.
They both feel indebted to the other. The love means that you so appreciate the other. So that the devotee feels I mean, how can we not feel so fortunate to have the Lord be concerned with us? But the Lord, He feels so touched by our intense devotion for Him. And so we feel we can never repay Him, He feels like He can never repay us. That's his. That's the. My spiritual master calls it transcendental relativity. Krishna is absolute. He's not related to anything else. It's all Him. If He fulfills, there's one without a second. But by creating entities that have free will, have choice, then there can be love. There can't be free. There can't be love without freedom. And then there's a possibility for relationship. And then and so instead of just being everything, he he comes to us and relates to us. And we, I mean, can you imagine the source of everything? How wonderful He is, and beautiful He is, and extraordinary He is. We already are attracted by so many things of His creation. Imagine what He's like. When we come into His presence, our advantage that we have over Him is that we can appreciate Him. So there's even the pastimes where He sees His reflection and thinks, wow. But we now, even though we're not God, we're small parts, but we can see God. In one sense, that's even better than being God. And when we see that, it just makes our hearts go crazy. And we serve Him with great love. And it says He feels that He has to love everybody. So therefore, He says His love is not as of a high quality. He's unlimited though, so it's really not a fault. But that's how He takes it. So He says, so that's why He feels indebted to us, is we only love Him. He's our everything to us. So He says, oh, the love of the devotees is so pure. So He feels that, how can I repay that? They were so kind. And then we say, I mean, of course, we're connected with the Lord and we can't repay that. So it's a complete selfless exchange that just increases the level of happiness. So the different, it's individuality without isolation. So here we're isolated. We're different and we're isolated. So the notion of only complete homogeneous oneness is like you said, if you played all the musical notes at once, that's unlimited. But it doesn't sound that great. Disconnected notes don't sound that great. But when you have a musical composition, you see there's unity and diversity. Things are happening, but there's a unity, and that's what we have in the spiritual realm. There's a unity and a diversity both. You know, if you want to make a painting, right? Well, black is all the colors. It's boring, you know, and everything just splashed on. Well, it might be called modern art, but it doesn't look very good. And even then, there's some unity there. That's what it is.
What is the word for in Sanskrit transcendence?
Trigunatik.
What is it?
Trigunatik.
Trigunatika.
Trigunas are three modes.
Three modes. The one which transcended the three modes.
Beyond the three modes. Okay. That's good. I'm not a great Sanskrit guy, so you're reaching the limits of my abilities there. Okay, well, thank you all those who took the trouble to come. And but everybody else who's listening online, thank you as well. We're trying to make this as accessible as possible. I'm happy to hear that it seems that the online presentation was working. You could see everything and hear everything and even participate at the end. So that's a big improvement. It makes it much more accessible to people. So thank you so very much. We'll finish the Isopanishad next week. The last four texts. Was it 15, 16, 17, and 18? And so Hare Krishna, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.